Every nation on Earth seeks ultimate power. They build vast armies. They build immense fleets. They develop overwhelming military forces to project their will across the globe, universally believing that military might is the final and only true guarantor of sovereignty. This belief is not merely abstract. It is ingrained in the historical memory of humanity, from the disciplined legions of Rome to the modern navies patrolling the seas.
But the most formidable weapon of modern history operates in complete silence. It is utterly invisible to the naked eye, intangible to conventional measurement. It carries no explosive payload that can be seen or measured by conventional means. This specific, subtle weapon dictates the rhythm of global commerce, dramatically shifts geopolitical alliances overnight, and meticulously defines the economic stability of billions of people every single day. Its power is systemic, absolute, and far more pervasive than any physical force.
It is not an aircraft carrier designed to patrol the seas. It is not an intercontinental missile capable of destroying cities. It is not a sophisticated cyber attack designed to bring down infrastructure. It is a simple piece of paper. The US dollar, the global reserve currency, which holds the vast majority of the world in financial captivity and perpetual servitude, paying tribute to the issuing nation simply by participating in trade.
Welcome to the Financial Coin Historian. Here, we dissect power, not just fleeting profit. We meticulously analyze the hidden intersection of finance and control, tracing the roots of modern economic systems back to their precise moments of origin and deception, looking past the official narratives. Today, we dissect the petrodollar. This is the ultimate, most sophisticated economic tool of American dominance, the deeply secret pact that gave the dollar unprecedented and unchallenged global authority, effectively establishing a true financial monopoly over the world's most critical and indispensable resource, oil. We uncover precisely how this ingenious pact turned mere paper currency, worth nothing more than the ink it was printed with, into a lasting system of global conquest and economic leverage. It is a compelling and complex story of oil, insatiable geopolitical ambition, and a deeply broken trust that has never been repaired. And finally, we explored the essential question: why this seemingly unbreakable global weapon, forged in the heat of a crisis, is now finally failing under the sheer weight of its own strategic overreach. The system that defined your life is nearing its end. This is the truth about the invisible tax you pay every day. The petrodollar story does not begin with oil. It begins with a profound, historical, broken promise. A promise solemnly made in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference at the close of the Second World War. The world sought financial stability after years of conflict, craving a system they could trust.
For decades following that pact, the US dollar was directly convertible to gold. This was the foundation of the Bretton Woods system, the pillar of global financial stability. This physical link to gold was the dollar's greatest strength. It was the physical constraint that limited excessive government spending and established international financial confidence. The U.S. guaranteed that $35 would buy 1 physical ounce of gold. This made the dollar legally and practically as good as gold in all global markets, establishing its universal acceptance. This was the gold standard's final, modern iteration.
But the 1960s were an era of massive domestic and foreign expansion. Massive domestic social programs, combined with the escalating unbudgeted costs of the Vietnam War, changed the financial landscape entirely and permanently. The U.S. government engaged in deficit spending that was completely unprecedented and ultimately unsustainable. They were printing far more dollars than their rapidly dwindling gold reserves could possibly cover. The basic financial math, for any clear-eyed observer, simply did not compute. The world noticed the blatant imbalance.
Foreign nations, most notably France, under the defiant leadership of Charles de Gaulle, began demanding their gold back. They were simply exercising their right to exchange their excess paper dollars for the physical wealth, as was their legal right under the Bretton Woods Agreement. The system was facing a lethal, existential bank run. A profound crisis of confidence in the U.S. government's financial integrity was sweeping the globe. The vaults were emptying fast.
President Richard Nixon made the desperate, unilateral, and historical decision: the final financial break from all physical backing. Facing the imminent collapse of the gold standard and the depletion of Fort Knox, he acted decisively to protect the national interest as he saw it. He unilaterally ended the gold convertibility. This shock became known instantly and dramatically as the Nixon Shock.
On August 15, 1971, the dollar became pure fiat currency. It was backed only by government decree. It was backed only by the fragile global trust that had been severely fractured by the war spending and the broken promise. The old financial order was dead, replaced by a system based on faith and military might alone. This monumental shift created a massive financial vacuum. The world had lost its primary financial anchor. Suddenly, the most important currency in global trade was just paper, subject to the whims of the issuing government. The world searched frantically for a new symbol of stability, a new mechanism to rely on. The vacuum demanded a new form of backing. The dollar desperately needed a new physical anchor, a new reason for perpetual global demand that transcended mere political allegiance, something that every single nation always needed, regardless of its political alignment with the U.S. or its own internal financial stability. That anchor had to be oil, crude oil, the indispensable global commodity that powers all industry, all transportation, and all global trade. Without oil, the modern world stops instantly, leaving the global economy paralyzed. Then came the second crisis, the 1973 oil embargo. Oil prices were volatile and critical, escalating rapidly. Global oil markets were thrown into chaos, which only heightened the strategic stakes for the U.S. The economic world was reeling, giving the U.S. maximum leverage to act. The U.S. leadership, however, saw not just chaos, but an extraordinary opportunity for massive strategic leverage. A strategic masterstroke was about to be born from this global confusion. It was the crucial moment the U.S. secured its financial empire for the next 5 decades, exchanging gold for black gold. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, a master of realpolitik and diplomatic leverage, devised the plan. Secret, high-stakes negotiations began with the rulers of Saudi Arabia, the world's most crucial oil exporter and regional leader, the country that could sway OPEC. The pact was astonishingly simple. It was strategically brilliant, and it fundamentally reshaped the entire world economy, directly impacting your wealth and purchasing power for decades to come. The agreement was revolutionary. Saudi Arabia would price all its oil exclusively in U.S. dollars only. No other currency, no yen, no mark, no franc, would be accepted for their massive oil exports. This simple diplomatic mandate instantly created artificial, perpetual, and non-negotiable global demand for the dollar. Every nation needed dollars to buy oil, period. This necessity was immediate and global. In turn, Saudi Arabia's immense oil profits, denominated entirely in dollars, would be recycled back. These profits would be reinvested directly into U.S. Treasury bonds and other U.S. debt instruments. This provided a massive, guaranteed and self-replenishing capital flow back to the U.S. debt market, funding American deficits and perpetually keeping interest rates low. The U.S., in turn, guaranteed total military protection for the kingdom, total security from all regional threats and internal instability. This pledge of overwhelming force was the physical backing for the paper dollar, replacing gold with military might and a standing army. This was the formal birth of the petrodollar system, the ultimate currency conquest. It was the greatest, most profound economic coup of the 20th century. A silent financial empire was born, backed by a handshake and the promise of overwhelming military protection, a structure built to last. The petrodollar secured America's global dominance for 50 years. It fueled its debt appetite. It allowed the U.S. to print money to buy real oil, real goods, and real labor from around the globe. The global market essentially became the primary and captive buyer of U.S. debt. This financial obligation is the true hidden reason your dollar holds any value today.
The petrodollar system fundamentally created perpetual global demand for the U.S. dollar. This was the mechanism of the currency conquest. Every single nation on Earth, whether they liked the U.S. government or not, needed to acquire U.S. dollars to buy oil. This need was absolute and non-negotiable. Without dollars, they could not participate in global trade. Without dollars, their entire industrialized economies would quickly grind to a complete halt, inevitably leading to crisis and collapse. This fundamental necessity meant that no matter what domestic instability, what American debt, or what inflation did, no matter how many deficits the U.S. government ran, the global demand for the dollar remained artificially constant and strong. The rest of the world was forced to absorb the instability. This phenomenon is known in high finance as the Exorbitant Privilege. It is the highest form of financial power one nation can hold over all others. Because the world needed dollars to trade oil, the U.S. could print paper and exchange it for real oil, real goods, and real labor without facing significant immediate consequence. The rest of the world was effectively forced to absorb the resulting financial instability and inflation, paying a global stability tax to the U.S. Treasury. The pact was always explicitly designed as a weapon against geopolitical rivals. The system made it virtually impossible for any rival to create a truly competing economic bloc, as they were all dependent on the dollar for essential energy trade. This was the ultimate economic chokehold, not a physical blockade, but a financial one. Any nation that dared to sell oil in a non-dollar currency, in euros or gold, faced immediate and crushing political and financial pressure. The consequences for challenging the petrodollar were swift and total, often leading to regime change, severe sanctions, or total collapse. The historical record confirms this strategy was deployed with severe consequences against nations like Iraq and Libya. Their defiance of the petrodollar was catastrophic and costly in the extreme. The petrodollar forces the entire world to hold massive amounts of U.S. debt. Foreign central banks needed to hold immense U.S. dollar reserves just to facilitate basic global trade. These dollars, in turn, were automatically invested into U.S. Treasury bonds, perpetually keeping the American financial engine running smoothly and borrowing costs low. These Treasury bonds, bought by foreign powers, finance the very U.S. military that protects the system. It is a perfectly closed loop, a self-reinforcing financial empire built on a single commodity and enforced by a strong military presence globally. The system feeds itself. This constant, guaranteed demand for dollars meant cheap, easy debt for America for half a century. It allowed the U.S. to consume far more than it produced for half a century. This was an era of unprecedented consumption financed by the rest of the world absorbing American debt. The system essentially exported American inflation. Because new dollars were absorbed by the global economy to buy oil, the price increases, the inflation, happened elsewhere first. The U.S. benefited while the world paid the stability tax.
The petrodollar cemented the dollar's role as the final currency of last resort. The global financial system had a master.
But the ultimate weapon is now failing. The enormous artificial pressure on the petrodollar is immense, and the system is visibly breaking down under the weight of its own strategic overreach and sheer ambition. The cracks are showing, not just in the economics, but in the trust that holds the entire structure together. The core, fatal problem is over-sanctioning. The U.S. leadership over the last 2 decades used the dollar too aggressively and too frequently as a geopolitical weapon, turning traditional allies into nervous observers and rivals into determined enemies. They effectively weaponized the very financial system they created, forgetting that a shared medium of exchange must remain neutral to retain global trust. In recent conflicts, nations globally watched in collective horror as the U.S. government unilaterally froze the foreign reserves of geopolitical rivals. This act sent a clear, chilling, and terrifying message to every nation on Earth. Your national wealth, held in U.S. dollars and U.S. Treasury bonds, can be frozen and seized with a single political decision from Washington. This was the crack in the foundation that broke the global trust in the dollar as a neutral reserve asset. Rivals and even close allies like India and Brazil saw the immediate existential risk. Why continue to hold your national wealth in a currency that can be instantly weaponized against you, potentially destroying your economy overnight? This profound fear accelerated the de-dollarization movement. A quiet yet profound revolution to secure financial independence and move away from the dollar is now underway across the world, led by nations who seek sovereignty over their own reserves. Nations are actively turning to bilateral trade. They are bypassing the dollar intermediary. They are using yuan, rubles, or local currencies for international transactions, especially for essential commodities like oil and gas. The petrodebt is weakening rapidly. Major oil producers are openly discussing non-dollar transactions. The decades-long agreement with Saudi Arabia is showing severe strain. The guaranteed global demand for the dollar is eroding rapidly, leading to increased pressure on the U.S. economy and higher domestic inflation. If global demand for the dollar falls, the most severe consequences will return home to America. That massive national debt, the one financed by the world for decades, will lose its primary captive buyer and come home to roost immediately, forcing a reckoning. The result would be catastrophic. A sharp decline in the dollar's international value, massive domestic inflation, punishing interest rate hikes, and severe economic pain that the modern generation is completely unprepared for. The exorbitant privilege is ending. The price of 5 decades of financial excess will be paid, and you, the individual consumer, will feel the cost personally in the price of everything you buy. The era of the petrodollar is fundamentally over.
History teaches one profound recurring lesson. Every financial empire eventually falls. Every single system built on paper and debt inevitably collapses under its own structural weight. The petrodollar's demise is inevitable. Your central question is not if it happens, but personal survival within the ensuing chaos. First defense, physical assets. You must hold what is real and tangible, things that cannot be sanctioned, frozen, or printed at will by a central authority. Gold, silver, and productive land. These are not speculative investments. They are historically proven stores of wealth across millennia. They represent real wealth, not a mere currency promise. Second defense, local resilience.
Rely less on fragile, complex global supply chains that are easily disrupted by geopolitical currency wars or political conflicts. Build local networks. Support local commerce. The shorter your supply chain, the safer and more insulated your community is from global shocks. Third defense, essential skills. Cultivate a real, productive, and valuable skill. Be the person the community needs most when money fails. The electrician who can maintain infrastructure. The craftsman who can repair tools. The farmer who can feed a community. The survivors hold essential, tangible value, not just depreciating dollars. The survivors hold value that money cannot buy. The collapse of the petrodollar will be the largest transfer of wealth of this century. It will move from those holding the paper promises to those holding the real productive assets. The choice is yours. Be crushed by history or learn from its clearest warnings and prepare. Hit subscribe to the Financial Coin Historian to decode the failures of empires and secure your financial future.